So we come to Revelation chapter 9. And in Revelation chapter 9, we're going to encounter the blowings of the fifth and sixth trumpets. Now we're going to slow down a little bit because, again, I want to show background. When I first heard Revelation taught as a kid in the late 1960s, there was always this, trying to find what the modern equivalents are or were at that point to what was happening in Revelation. So here in chapter 9, we see the hell is opened up and locusts come out, and they're very strange looking locusts. So in the 60s, they were very sure, oh, these must be helicopters, and we're now talking about military campaigns and on and on and on until we're actually pointing out what's the 10-nation confederacy and who's the Antichrist. And I'm trying very, very hard not to do that because it seems like throughout time, especially since the 1960s and forwards, is when that's done, it's usually wrong. But Revelation itself is not wrong. So I'm trying very hard to put it back in its context, which allows it to be timeless. And then we'll see, as time goes by, what is the actual fulfillment of these things. So here in Revelation chapter 9, we encounter the blowing of trumpets, number 5 and number 6. This right now is talking about trumpet number 5. So I want to do a few things today. I want to go through the text itself and try to keep the train on the tracks and not go speculate about this, that, and the other thing. Just want to say, what does the text say? The second thing that I want to do is to give the background. Now, there is background here, and I think it's quite important. And we'll see that as we get to it. And the third thing is the big so what. Why are we getting this information, and what can we glean from it today? So rather than going to try to hunt for the Antichrist or when the next war is, we're going to take a much more measured approach and set this scripture where it belongs in context. So first thing we want to do is look at the text itself. We're in Revelation chapter 9. Remember the sets of judgments. There's 3 sets of seven judgments. The 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. Now, when we get to chapter 10, I'm going to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in that because turns out there's another set of 7 judgments, and they're called the 7 thunders. John's about to write them down, but the Lord is going to tell him, don't write those things down. So we will talk about that when we get to chapter 10, but I mention it here because I'm going to bring it up again in a little while, and we'll bookmark it. So, the review, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, and in our study of the blowing of the trumpets to date, we've seen 4 trumpets that have been blown, and each one of them brings judgment. First trumpet was hail and fire mixed with blood, and then what we found was that the earth was burned up, 1/3 of the trees, and all of the grass, as God's judgment was poured out here on the natural world itself. The second trumpet, we saw this great mountain that was hurled into the sea. We didn't know exactly what that mountain was, but we do see the effects. The effects is that 1/3 of the sea was destroyed, the salt water, including the creatures of the sea, and including 1/3 of the boats, the shipping on the sea. So you can see this global judgment. The third trumpet was blown, and this mysterious thing was thrown from heaven, a star from heaven called wormwood or bitterness, and it made undrinkable 1/3 of the world's fresh water supply, and 1/3 of the rivers, and 1/3 of the drinking water. Again, judgment on this natural world that we have, in essence, polluted by our sin. The fourth trumpet was blown, and that was sort of like a reverse of creation. 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the moon, 1/3 of the stars were all darkened. And we saw when we covered that, it was sort of like, okay, there's just sort of rolling up creation itself to go all the way back to the 4th day of creation with the sun and the moon, and now all of a sudden it's starting to be darkened. Also mentioned that these judgments in Revelation seem to pattern some of the judgments of Israel in captivity in Egypt and the plagues that God had put onto Egypt. We saw from Exodus 12:12 that it wasn't just God coming and doing war against the Egyptians or Pharaoh, but also against the gods of Egypt. That's an important point because Exodus, the judgments there, were affecting not just earth, but God tells us affecting heaven as well. That's a pattern for Revelation, because as we see the blowing of these trumpets and the other judgments, there is judgment in heaven as well as on earth. And when we go forward to the seven thunders, we're going to talk about that again. So, as promised, let's actually look at the text. This is Revelation chapter 9. And in verse 1, it says, "The fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth, and it was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft. And then with the smoke, or from the smoke, came locusts on the earth, and they were given power like the power of scorpions of the earth." Let's stop right there a second, because as we've looked at the text up to here, what we have seen is something that is not normal for us to see. It's taking place in heaven like the rest of this. But there's this fallen star from heaven. Now, in this case, it's talking about an angel. And that's not uncommon. We see that in other places in Revelation. We'll see it in Revelation 20 when the star from heaven is going to affect things on earth again. The stars, angels, they're interchangeable terminology in the scripture, especially in the Old Testament, as is the sons of God, by the way. And so this star falling from heaven is obviously an angel from heaven. He's going to be given authority not to close up the abyss, but to open it. Now, part of the question is going to be, well, is this angel from heaven, is this a good angel or is this a bad angel? Is it a good angel doing God's bidding, or is it a bad angel doing God's bidding? And to which I say, does it really matter? My hunch is that it's a bad angel because of the concept of falling. It doesn't say that it's starting from heaven. It says it's fallen from heaven. But there are scholars on both sides of that equation. It's not something to fight about, because it's not the fact that it's a good or bad angel. It's the fact that it has authority to open hell itself. That's the real king. And so when he opens it, comes this smoke, and from the smoke, locusts. That's pretty freaky. Now, we're going to talk about that when we get the background. But the abyss is hell itself. And so from the abyss, there are already angels, demons, that are in hell. Jesus says in Matthew 25, verse 41, that hell had been created for the devil and his angels, or demons. It had not been created for humans. And so apparently there are some that are there already, because they come smoking out of hell when this angel releases and opens the shaft to the abyss. Okay, it's kind of strange sounding, but that's what the text is saying. So I guess the important part is, if it's been given authority from heaven with these key to the shaft of the bottomless pit, even if it's a fallen angel, that's the Lord doing this. That's the Lord's sovereignty. That's the Lord's work. That's the Lord from heaven accomplishing his work through these demons on earth. That's strange, but not unusual in Scripture. That's God's total sovereignty. So the next thing we see is what happens when he does this, and that's the effects. They're very clear. Verse 3, "Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth. They were given power of scorpions, like the power of scorpions on earth." Now, I've never been stung by a scorpion. I have been stung by a bee. Apparently, stung by a scorpion is 100 times worse than being stung by a bee. "They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green plant or tree." Now, that's very different from the first of the trumpet judgments, when we saw that, a third of the trees and all the grass was burned up. By the way, grass goes back again, if you're wondering, why there's grass here. But they're not to touch that. They very specifically are to plague mankind. And not all of man, but those who are non-believers, those who are also non-sealed. So they were given not to harm they were commanded not to harm the grass or green plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. Remember, they were protected, at least 144,000, but in this case, maybe it's all believers. Text is silent, but it's definitely here. in the context, it's aiming at non-believers. So here are these demons coming to plague mankind. They were, verse 5, allowed to torment them for 5 months. Well, why 5 months? Again, good news. I have no idea. But some have said that, well, 5 months is the life cycle of a locust. That makes sense. I wouldn't always read too many things into the numbers. 5 months really only appears here. But that's going to be 5 long months. And what were they allowed to do? They were allowed to torment them for 5 months, but not kill them. That tells you how bad their torment is, because their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings someone. And in those days, and this is the key part, verse 6, people will seek death and will not find them. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. Now, that's an amazing amount of torment. I've never really experienced that, and I pray I never do. But can you imagine, it's like the demons hate mankind. Well, why do they hate mankind? Because we're created in the image of God. Even those who worship demons, even those who willfully become Satanists, don't fully recognize that they are serving beings that absolutely hate us because we're God's children. And so they're given this authority then to torment mankind that hasn't been saved, that isn't following Jesus, and it lasts for 5 months. So now what else does it talk about? The text talks about what they look like. And here's where it gets, once again, a little more bizarre. Verse 7, in appearance, the locusts were like horses prepared for battle. Now, with this sort of exaggerated description of what a natural locust would look like, and the fact that it's coming from the pit of hell, we know that there's more to this image than simply them being these locust creatures on earth. These are demons, and they're coming out to wage war. That's why there's, horses like battle. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold. Again, why crowns of gold? Someone had said, oh, it's like the front of a helicopter. No, it's not. It's a crown of gold on a locust that has a head. And the head were faces like human faces. Now, if anything, if we can pull anything out of that, we can see the image of this being like an army. We're told that. These are horses prepared for battle. It's like an army going forth. It's a demonic army. And when we get to the background, we'll see why. Their hair was like women's hair, meaning it was probably long. Their teeth like lion's teeth. So the mouth of these vicious demonic creatures is scary and effective. They have breastplates like breastplates of iron. See why people said they were helicopters, right? So breastplates of iron, metal, but really the image is, going to war. These are well-armed, vicious creatures. The breastplates of iron, the noise of their wings was like the noise of many chariots with horses rushing into battle. So you cannot miss from the text that this is a demonic army going to battle against mankind that doesn't believe for 5 months to torment people. They have tails and stings like scorpions. We've covered that already. And their power to hurt people for 5 months is in their tails. You're getting zapped, demonically zapped. Does it mean physically zapped? I don't know. Is it psychologically, spiritually? I don't know. Probably all the above. It doesn't sound like it's fun. It sounds like a preamble to hell itself. Think this is bad. See what eternity in hell looks like. Then verse 11, they have as king over them the angel of the bottomless. So here he's got this king over these angels of the bottomless pits. And then it's like, okay, who's he talking about? Is he talking about, Satan? Is he talking about Lucifer? Is he talking about another angel? And it doesn't say. It could be any of the, above. Certainly Satan is the king of all of them. Whether that here is known, I don't know. Probably. But it's probably then different from the first angel who's coming to open the abyss. It's very difficult to weed through this stuff because the names aren't given. And on top of that, when we get into the background in the next section, it ends this part of the text in verse 12, which says, the first woe is past. Remember the 3 woes. are the fifth, sixth, and seventh trumpets. So the first woe is past. Behold, two woes are still to come. So what have we seen here in the text? We've seen an angel from heaven. I'm going to guess it's a demon. Some have said it's an angel just doing God's bidding. I don't think it matters, because what matters is the effects. It doesn't close up hell, it opens hell. Notice the connection between heaven and earth. This makes no sense in our culture to talk about stuff like this unless you realize there's a spiritual reality behind it. So all of hell is going to be opened up. There's this smoke and locust, which is some sort of demonic army that's going to attack mankind that doesn't believe in Jesus for 5 months. They're going to wish they died, but they're not going to die. And it is linked to these demons and a king of the demons, probably Satan, whose time is short, but is now going to directly attack the people on the earth in God's judgment. So we're talking about the text, but we still need to talk about its background and the significance of why this is here. And we'll turn our attention to that next.